Hello Blitz fans of all ages, it's me, PlumCastle, and today we're going to be taking a look at 3 tanks in the game files that have not yet released into the game. In other words, we're going to be taking a look at 3 tanks that, to my knowledge, have not even been teased by Wargaming. And I do have to give a special thank you to MegaLion69 for providing the images I'm about to show you. The links to his Twitch and YouTube will be in the description. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the tanks and, more importantly, their statistics. So I come over here, we can see that the first one is a Tier 9 collector from the British tech tree, and that is the Cobra. Again, this image was provided by MegaLion69. Here's a little bit of a preview of the stats. I will actually also show them in the game so that we can get the entire list and kind of go into each tank in detail. And this is the one we're going to be looking at first. Honestly, I think this tank is going to look probably the most unique out of the bunch. So if we come over to the British tech tree, I went ahead and got the mod that will let me show all the tanks. There's the Tier 9 Cobra, and we'll take a look at the stats in a second. But first, look at this thing. This is just the weirdest looking tank I have seen in the game yet. In fact, you could almost put giant tires on it and it would look like one of those things from World of Tanks PC. It's just very odd and almost kind of RV looking. Not RV, but, you know, RTV, whatever the all-terrain vehicles are. It's a very unique looking tank. But that said, now let's take a look at the stats. Hit points, 1,700. Now this is a medium tank, so yeah, that's kind of about the amount of hit points I would expect. Of course, not going to be as much as the heavy per se. Armor, looking at these values, it's a little bit hard to tell what it really looks like. But based on the values, it looks like it's going to have a little bit of armor, but not a whole ton. And a fair amount of tanks are going to be able to HE this one, it looks. View range is 260 meters. Honestly, that's not all that particularly special. That's kind of more what I would expect of a heavy. Concealment, those values are okay. Damage per minute, though, that one's interesting. 2,200 roughly. I'm sure you could do something to bump it up to that level. But 2,200 is okay for a medium. Reload time, 10.96 seconds. Average penetration, 235 and 200 for the high explosive anti-tank. So those would be heat rounds and HE rounds. So average damage is going to be 400 for your standard heat rounds and then 500 for your high explosive. So this thing's going to have a slightly higher alpha than some other tanks in the game. It's not the highest, but for a medium, that's I would argue that that's pretty decent. Aiming time is 3.8 seconds, so it's not going to be like super quick to aim in all the way, but the dispersion is at 0.345, which is something that we see on a lot of tanks, at least what I see on a lot of tanks, and that's generally just an average dispersion, at least when it comes to mediums and light tanks. Now, in terms of the gun turn limit, we can only go up 12 degrees, which is not super fantastic, which is kind of weird. You would think something like this would probably go a little bit more than 12 degrees, but you can see basically there's stuff blocking it. However, its gun depression is sitting at 10 degrees, which is actually really cool. Honestly, it looks like it probably could have like 15 or 20 again, but hey, that's just how the tank was made. But 10 degrees down is pretty cool. Forward speed, 45. It's not the fastest. Reverse speed, 20. That's okay. Average speed overall is going to be around 32. And most of this other stuff, except for the turret turn rate. So the turret can turn at 33 degrees a second, which is, I mean, that's okay. Hull turn rate is at 43 degrees a second. So if you combine that, you get fairly close to 90 degrees in just over a second. So that's a totally fine turn radius or turn speed, and I would totally kind of expect that for something like this. Overall, looking at it, I would say statistics wise, at least to me, it doesn't really stand out too much in any particular area. It just seems like all around it'll probably be pretty it might even be decent. It's just not really like super overpowered from what I can tell. And I think the main draw to this one would be more just what it looks like. And again, please keep in mind that these are technically stats that have been pulled out of the game file. So these could totally change at any given point. So these are not the final stats. This is just in the current state, assuming this tank is going through testing, which I don't know if it is. But these stats could change. I do want to point that out. Next, after the Cobra, though, if we back out again, we have another tank, and this time it's going to be an American. And this is a Tier 10. The XM66F. Now, I'm actually not entirely sure that that's going to be the final name because Funny enough, the Sheridan, the Tech Tree Sheridan, actually has an XM sort of name in front of it, just no one calls it that, everyone just calls it the Sheridan. So I don't know that this is going to be what the name's going to be. Again, this image was provided by Megalion69, and again, we'll be taking a look at this in the game as well, so we can kind of get the 3D model of it. But it's an American Tier 10, and if we come over to the American Tier 10s, it is a tank destroyer. It's a very unique looking one. Of course, it has PBR, but look at that turret. That is about the biggest turret on any American tank that I've seen. That's honestly one of the biggest turrets I've seen in the game. Very weird looking tank. My hunch tells me, given that this is a Tier 10 and that it's a collector, it's probably going to be pretty decent, especially in the armor area, just considering how round it is. Of course, lower plate, that's like flat as all get out, so that's probably going to be pretty easy to penetrate. Although it is fairly sloped, which is good. The upper plate is also really sloped, but theoretically, if you got this at an incline, I'm sure something could penetrate it. But anyway, let's take a look at the stats. Hit points, 1,900. That's only 200 more than the previous one, but again, this is a tank destroyer, so even though it is a tier above, it would kind of make sense that this one probably just doesn't have as many hit points. Tank destroyers generally have super high alpha and not a ton of hit points. In main armor, this one's a bit thicker, as we can see from the front. It's 248. What that exactly means, and of course this doesn't take into consideration effective armor, because obviously if you've got something that's, say, 250-ish millimeters thick, but you angle that, that's going to act more like 300 plus. So it will probably be fairly well armored. Now the rear, it can be HE'd in certain places. It's an American tank, and that is a pretty big target to hit your HE shots on. So if you get behind one of these things, they're probably not having a super fantastic time. But beyond that, we also have a concealment. This is actually lower than the previous tank, but again, kind of makes sense. Tank destroyers are one of those things that you generally want to find a bush, and then you'll probably not be spotted until you fire the giant gun, and then everyone will see you, generally speaking. Damage per minute. This is a really nifty number. Nearly 3,130. That is a decent chunk of damage per minute. On top of that, the reload is just shy of 8 seconds, so the fact that you can actually shoot fairly quickly is fairly nice, and it is a good thing that this tank destroyer does have the armor. Looking at the average penetration, it's going to be 270, 340, and 65 for the AP, heat rounds, and high explosive respectively. In terms of average damage, 410 per shot for the standard rounds, 350 for premium rounds, and 470 for high explosive rounds. Now this is heat rounds, so that's where the 340 millimeters of penetration comes from. I'm not like a huge fan of heat rounds. They kind of like to absorb into tracks a little bit too much for my liking, but they do provide a very good amount of penetration. And 410 alpha every less than 8 seconds is pretty decent in my opinion, and that's definitely why the damage per minute is sitting where it is. Gun turn limit, there we go, 20 degrees up. Generally speaking, you're probably at a point of higher elevation to see more of the map, so in this case, gun depression is a little bit more important. That is 10 degrees, which is really cool. And in terms of turning left or right, because this is a tank destroyer, it can't turn all the way around, just physically speaking. 45 degrees to the left and to the right. So you're going to get about a 90-degree arc in front of you, which means that you're going to want to be careful for things coming around you, because you can't necessarily turn around quick enough, or more like you can't get your turret over to them anyway. Beyond that, though, average speed, it's a bit of a slug, sitting at 26 forward. Oh, sorry, my bad. Average speed is 26. Still kind of a slug. But forward is 40. That's actually a little bit better. Reverse is 20. So pretty good values. Again, not all of this is set in stone. This could change. This is likely just through the testing phase. Weight, though, 52. Weight doesn't really matter. But the turret turn rate is sitting at 20. That's a little bit slow. And the whole turn rate is about 33. So you're going to only be able to spin total about, I would say, what is that, like 50 degrees a second until you max out your gun, and then it's going to only be about 30 degrees a second. So not super quick. But taking that into consideration, theoretically you could, based on the statistics, maybe play this frontline sometimes. The fact that you can't really turn around really quick makes that probably not a great idea, though I'm pretty certain somebody's going to try that. Armor-wise, it's good. Gun depression, it's good. But yeah, you do really need to be careful for that very weak back. But that takes us to the last tank, and it is a heavy tank this time, and it is a Chinese one. Now this one's going to be pretty big. It is the 114 SP2. Again, image provided by Megaline69, and stats are not necessarily set in stone. Either way, if we take a look here at the Chinese and then we go to the tier 10 heavy, the 114 SP2. Now this one's a very big tank, as pretty much all of the Chinese heavies are. And we're going to take a look at this. So hit points, it is 2,600. That is a lot of hit points, which is, of course, very nice for a heavy tank. Now, regarding the armor on the front, it is very thick, sitting at 290, and that's not even taking into consideration the fact that we've got some angles going on here, so that's probably going to be more than like 300 effective, is my guess, but that's a lot of armor. In terms of the hull, it's not as good, especially down below here. It's probably going to be fairly easy to penetrate for the most part, unless maybe the tank is like wiggling back and forth a lot. In terms of the sides, 160, stuff's going to go right through that. Probably not HE unless you're running Hesh or something. Same for the other side. In the back, in terms of the turret and the rear, actually, they're both sitting at 90 millimeters, so that's just enough to cover you from not getting HE'd by everything, but anything with like a particularly large alpha is probably going to be able to make it through there. In terms of view range, 250 meters, that's a little bit more than I generally see on a heavy tank, I think, but still, it's not much. Concealment, basically none. Damage per minute, 2,282. So, of course, it's not going to be as high as the previous tank, but for a heavy tank, nearly 2,300, probably 2,300 with some provisions, is definitely doable for a heavy tank and pretty nice. Reload time, 16.3. That's about where I would expect something like this to fall. Average penetration is going to be 255 for AP rounds. That's fine. And 325 for heat rounds. So again, heat rounds to give you some great penetration. Sometimes don't really go where you want them to, or they just kind of blow up. But 325 millimeters of penetration on a heavy, I would say that's pretty nice. High explosive is 69, so yeah, this thing can't even HE itself in the back. In terms of damage, this thing's pretty good. 620 for AP rounds, 520 for heat rounds, and 870 for high explosive. And its dispersion is sitting at 0.412, so this thing's not like super duper accurate. It's not the worst, but it's based on what I'm seeing so far, I'm getting some, was it the TP, whatever the tier 10, it was in here somewhere. I'll just take a look here. The 60 TP, and I could never pronounce that last name. I'm getting those kind of vibes on this tank just with the alpha and the accuracy. This one might be a little bit more accurate. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, those are some higher alpha numbers. Aiming time takes you nearly 6 seconds. So this is, yeah, you're not going to be aiming in very quickly with this one, but hopefully that's okay because theoretically you'd be, I don't know, taking a long time to aim in anyway. So taking a long time to aim in while waiting for the reload time, I guess, makes sense. In terms of gun turn limit, up is 20. It's kind of average, I think. Down is 7. Not a great ton. This is, I think, probably going to be not like a super great hold down tank unless you can find a hill big enough to cover your hull, and then you might be talking if you can not have to look down too much, because 7 degrees is good, but it's not like great or anything. Top speed 32 forward, that's kind of sluggish. Reverse is 13, that's kind of slow. Average speed 25. Turn rate, on the turret is only 18.77 degrees a second. Maybe with crew enhancements like all the way up to the max, maybe you could get like 20, maybe. But that's really slow. And then you got 30. So at maximum, you're going to be turning, like at best, 50 degrees a second, which is not very fast, and a lot of stuff is just going to be able to circle you in that case. So overall, This tank, from what I understand, is going to be like your typical super heavy. Really high alpha, kind of a longer reload. I mean, it's not too long, honestly, but not great dispersion, high alpha, really slow tank. But yeah, that does conclude the video, and again, I do just wanted to give one last thanks to MegaLion69. He was the one that kind of gave me all the images and then also showed me what tanks were new because I kind of had lost track. But anyway, that does conclude the video, and so with that, I hope y'all enjoyed, and as always, have fun, good luck, and happy tanking.